TCC New York is dedicated to promote Turkish language and culture in New York and in the USA, but at the same time, we are dedicated to promote peace, dialogue, friendship, understanding of diverse communities, so that's why we are all gathered today here. And there are 18 Turkish cultural centers in the East Coast region, and 11 of them are in New York State, and 7 of them are in New York City. In terms of promoting peace and dialogue, locally we organize Abraham's Table, which brings together the Abraham, the people of Abrahamic religions together. And internationally we organize the Ambassador Series, which we bring together the international community from the United Nations missions to talk about issues that concerns everybody globally and locally. And this year, our topic for the Ambassador Series will be how can new emerging global powers can contribute to the peace in the world. Let me start a little bit of information about the Abraham's Table, why we are organizing these events. More than in any time other than the history of the humanity, we need interfaith and intercultural dialogue in today's world. In particular, New York embraces people and communities from various religious, cultural, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds. It is essential to build a strong community that people of all faiths come together to meet and get to know their neighbors, to talk and listen. They learn about other perspectives and we all grow together. The Abraham's Table discussion and forum series aims to bring people of Abrahamic religions, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and other faith communities together. The ultimate goal for this series is to contribute to the peace and harmony in society by building bridges for long-lasting friendship. Guest speakers from different backgrounds, including religious leaders, academicians, and researchers, share their knowledge and experience with the audience. It is our intention that all who attend gets a chance to communicate, ask questions, and learn from one another while appreciating the commonalities and respecting the differences as peace builders. Together we can make a difference in our society by collaborating on common issues which will help our communities to learn and grow together. More importantly, we can educate each other and also encourage and engage our youth to become more understanding about other religions and share perspectives for a better future. Now, we'd like to start our program with a moment of silence for the people of Japan. As you may know, we would like to extend our most heartfelt sympathies for the loss of the loved ones in Japan after the earthquake and tsunami. Our thoughts are with the people of Japan during these difficult times. And TCC New York is organizing a fundraiser program, and also we have some donation boxes in the front. If you would like to make any donations, you are more than welcome. Now, if you all kind of rise and join us for a moment of silence for a prayer for our friends in Japan. Thank you. You may be seated. Now, please, it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski. He is the spiritual leader of Anshe Haset in Manhattan. Let me just read his biography. Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski serves as a rabbi of congregation Anshe Haset on the Upper West Side since 2001, where he lives with his wife and 4 children. He was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1997. Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski loves working at the synagogue because the community embodies the best of committed Jewish life, study that stretches the mind, spiritual that moves the heart, and the acts of caring that improve the world. You will find him engaged in each of these areas of Jewish life at Anshe Chasset in Manhattan. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Jeremy Kamenov.
Very much. I'm very happy to be here with my fellow religious people, my fellow representatives of some of the world's monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So, Judaism's entree into this topic, if I may say, may be somewhat different than the other two religions because we spent a very, very long time, many centuries, somewhat out of history. Jewish political life since really the 6th century BCE, and then really very intensely also in the 1st century of the Common Era, was defined primarily by exile, being away from what we took to be our ancestral homeland and having a kind of political organization to our societies that was of necessity relatively small and local, and for the most part did not deal with questions of war and peace. There are discussions in our sacred texts about these issues, but they are entirely theoretical, and in some cases they are better characterized as fantasy than as history. The imagination of what it is that we would do, the Jewish people would do, if they ever returned to the land of Israel and had a more, shall we say, normal political organization, one can't derive from there anything particularly about what happened because they were not in possession of any armies and they were not in possession of any sort of weapons. They were, for the most part, content to run a rather restricted political life that was restricted to religious institutions and getting by each day and a kind of a smaller vista of local economics. We do have some concept of martyrdom, however, and that is related to our long time in exile. The reason for martyrdom is, for the most part, to resist the tide of our enemies who would wipe us away. If somebody were to ask you to do 3 things in the normal course of events, if somebody were to ask you to violate the sexual mores of the Torah, if somebody were to ask you to worship idols, or if somebody were to ask you to kill somebody else, in those contexts you are obliged to martyr yourself, to say, my life would be unworthy of living if I violated those cardinal commitments of being a Jew. To be a little bit more broad, if somebody were to go on war against Judaism, if, as actually happened, the Roman emperors were to forbid the practice of Judaism, in such a case, the scope of what constitutes martyrdom, or what we call Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of the divine name, grows wider. But the basic idea of being a martyr for Judaism is nothing like, in a classical sense, and nothing like the kind of destructive acts that we associate perhaps in some quarters with martyrdom today. It's about ennobling and dignifying the commitments of your life, even unto death. That it is simply not worth living if you are called upon to swerve from the core commitments that make life worth living. We do have concepts of war, but as I said, those are primarily fantasies, because there never was, until the 20th century, a Jewish army, not since ancient times. There's a concept that you have obligatory war, and that is primarily delimited to defensive war. If somebody attacks you, haba lehargecha hashkem lehargo, says the Talmud. Somebody comes to kill you, wake up early and kill him first. But that, outside of the imagined history of the biblical wars against the people of Amalek, or the biblical wars of Joshua as described in that book, outside of those long ago imagined memories, or the forward-looking fantasies that in some messianic era a divine representative would fight idolatry, We have no real concept of active war. What I would say, though, about even both the historical look and the fantastic look forward, what I would say about our concepts of war, and this very much relates to what we call terrorism in our world today, is that there simply must be, and I say this both with in conversation with the Western conversation about just war over these many centuries, as well as the Jewish conception, there must be, and always, the very, very ground of talking about ethics in wartime is the distinction between civilian and combatant. Everybody is always to be offered, in Jewish tradition, an opportunity to make peace, even when, as Maimonides says, you know, in the Messianic era, you're going to come forward and you're going to give people the choice of being an ethical monotheist or the sword. You're giving them the choice of becoming an ethical monotheist. Each person has to be treated as capable of being on the right side or the wrong side, and the indiscriminateness of contemporary terrorism is not something that one can ever find in our tradition. Our tradition says that, again, even in these imagined wars of the past or wars of the future, Vekarata aleha shalom, when approaching your enemies or when approaching your a city which you would be fighting, you must first give it an opportunity to make peace. That is the optimal condition, and the people in it are to be treated not as implacable and immortal enemies, but they would cease to be your enemies when they would be able to choose peace. We do have this concept, the biblical people of Amalek, which is treated in Jewish tradition as a kind of embodiment of evil. Even they are to be given an opportunity to choose peace, because at the moment that they say we would prefer peace to violence, they cease to be Amalek. They cease to be the embodiment of evil if they have chosen peace. So the thing that I would stress is the necessary distinction between civilians and combatant, and the view that you can wipe away, anashim, nashim, vataf, men, women, and children, is completely foreign to the wars which Jews would imagine themselves fighting, and in the past and in the future, and which they strive even in this not so easy era of a strong Israel Defense Forces, in which they strive to embody. I happen to know personally one of the principal authors of the Israeli Army's Code of Ethics. And we all know that in this world everything is attained only imperfectly, but it is something that the Jewish people strive very seriously to do, is to distinguish between combatant and civilian. And with this I'll leave you with one rabbinic teaching. When approaching a city to besiege it, a city which you recognize there are real enemies in, you should encircle it on 3 sides, and not a 4th side. Because if you encircle it on the 4th side, you all but guarantee that there will be total slaughter. But instead, you should encircle it only on 3 sides, because that always creates the opportunity for some people to escape the slaughter of violence into peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi, for sharing all these wonderful.
I just want to add one more thing, is that due to other circumstances, I will have to leave early, but I hope that we'll have an opportunity to have interchange.
Thank you. As I attend many of these interfaith dialogue programs, what I come up is all these religions, all the world religions, they teach peace, even though we are at the wartime. So, it's great, to hear that again. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Andrew Skotnicki. Dr. Andrew Skotnicki is a professor of Christian ethics and the chair of Department of Religious Studies at Manhattan College. He received his PhD in Religion and Society from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. His general area of research is in Catholic social ethics, with a specific focus on the question pertaining to religion and criminal justice. He is the author of Religion and the Development of the American Penal System, Criminal Justice and the Catholic Church, and his new book, The Last Judgment, Christian Ethics in a Legal Culture will be published this fall 2011. We're looking forward to that. Now please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Scott.
Good evening, my friends. It's an honor to be here. Holy war, terrorism, and martyrdom. A daunting topic, and yet so timely and necessary, and such a joy to be able to talk about it with you, my friends, and my esteemed colleagues. And I thank you so much, my friend, for inviting me. In Christian tradition, there are three justifications, or better yet, three interpretations of physical violence. The first would come, and most important, would be found in what we call the paradigmatic texts. And those would be the Gospels, the stories of Jesus in the Gospels. That's what we would term as the grammar of Christian faith. That's the language you have to speak if you're a Christian. The second interpretation of physical violence in Christian tradition is a reflection upon those texts done in a pragmatic theological way of a people in the middle of history trying to understand what those texts mean in the light of the day-to-day struggles that human beings individually and socially have for security, for peace, and for self-defense. And that emerged in the late 4th century. It was called the just war tradition, still very, very active in Christian theology and in Christian discourse. The third interpretation of physical violence in Christianity is a theological distortion that honors neither the paradigmatic text nor the intellectual tradition, but rather couches the enemy and the other in apocalyptic terms, and always in a form of demonizing the other. And that would be the tradition, if you will, or the anti-tradition in this case, of holy war. So let me briefly talk about the three. First of all, I always like to say, Rabbi, Jesus is and was a Jew. He was a Jewish boy, he was a Jewish man, and he died as a Jew and never intended to be anything other than a Jew, which I might say is quite a well-kept secret among Christians. Jesus came to form the Catholic Church, or I'm Catholic, but you know what I mean? Jesus didn't come to form the Catholic Church. Jesus came to be a messenger of peace. He came to be what we as Christians believe is not the founder of a new religion, but the teacher of unconditional love and unconditional forgiveness toward everybody. Jesus was, you could call him, and I play with this idea in this new book, Jeremy, of whether he was an antinomian. Nomos in Greek means law, and there's some question as to whether Jesus was an antinomian. He wasn't. Jesus loved the law because he was Jewish. But like other Jews, Jesus had what I call a contemplative interpretation of the law. And this, by the way, I would say the Sufis have the same position in Islam with regard to Islamic law. The foundation for Jesus of the law, which is beautiful to me, is that the Torah represents for Jesus the call to be mindful of God, just as the Quran is a reminder for Muslims to be mindful of God all the time, in the great and important events of life and in the most mundane. But what Jesus did with regard to the Torah was, rather than obey it literally, he took seriously the fact that he, like a good Jew or a good Muslim, was called to reflect upon God or Allah constantly. But the way in which law was understood was not as a rigorous tool to obey, but an invitation to love always and everywhere. And so Jesus, as many of you know, even those of you who are not Christian, only gave one law. You can comb the four Gospels all you want, but he only gives one law: unconditional love. And how do you know you love the other? Jesus says this very clearly twice in the Sermon on the Mount. Anybody can love the people who love them. In fact, you may not love them at all. It may be some form of enlightened selfishness. And so Jesus makes it clear that the only way you know you love is when you love the person who hates you, when you love the person who persecutes you, and when you love the person who, God forbid, tortures you and kills you. There is absolutely none justification for any form of violence in the teaching of Jesus Christ, simply from the texts, the paradigmatic texts of the gospel. Thus, there is absolutely no justification to hurt anyone. In fact, as you all know, it is the task of the Christian who literally believes what Jesus is, to suffer and to take blows, the famous turn the other cheek, but also to imitate Christ on the cross. And he says in his final act, Father, forgive them. Forgive them. Now, is there a concept of martyrdom? Of course there is. But martyrdom which shows up fairly regularly in the discourses of Jesus in three very important, most important texts. The first of which would be when he says, there is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friend. So the first concept of martyrdom is really what all Christians, and perhaps, as I say, since Jesus didn't come to form a religion, I can be a little expansive here and say maybe he's saying for all of us. Because I think implicitly you might even guess that. The greatest love of all is to die for another. So we have, and of course, his famous soliloquy on the cross, to forgive. And then we have the third one, which has sometimes been misinterpreted about martyrdom and the teachings of Jesus, and that is the Good Shepherd. He says in the Good Shepherd is guiding the sheep, and when the wolf comes, it is the task of the shepherd to stand before the wolf. He never says kill the wolf. He never says beat the wolf. He just simply says it is the task of the Good Shepherd when the wolf stands is to put the sheep behind him or her, as a good mother would do, as any loving human being would do, and to bear the brunt of the force of the adversary out of love for others. So that's holy war, terrorism, martyrdom in the teachings of Jesus. The just war tradition then becomes the intellectual attempt of Christians to make sense of those unbelievable teachings. And I think anyone, as we all know, would say, rather difficult for the ordinary man and woman to live, how to make sense of them in a violent world. And so I don't want to go in, maybe in the question and answer period, I could give you the actual details of what the just war is. But suffice to say, for the first 300 and plus years of Christianity, like our Jewish sisters and brothers, Christianity, as you may know, was an outlawed religion, and there were ferocious persecutorial attacks on the part of the Romans against them. All of that suddenly changed in 313 when Constantine decided to convert. And so the persecutor of yesterday became the persecuted of today. Prior to Constantine, you could be either burnt alive, fed to the lions, or, well, I forget what the other one was. Oh, crucified. Those were the three. The big one. How can I forget that one? Those were the Roman punishments for people who were threats to the state, and they were the three punishments given to Christians. So Nero famously lit the Christians up in 64 AD and doused them with flames and used them to light the city streets. But the funny thing is that after 313, they who were persecuted, then they became the persecutors in many ways, because you had to be Christian. But the point I want to make is that the reflection of the just war essentially argued that there were, here's how the just war goes. It says simply, it's bad to kill, we should all love each other. But since we're not going to get along, and we are going to fight, let's at least have some moral guidelines. And without going into all of them, I'll just say quickly, it essentially has to do with a legitimate cause in the national interest, declared by competent authority, always a last resort, must take into means whether or not it can be a successful war, must always ask the question whether or not the damage to be done outweighs the good to be gained, in which case it would not be a legitimate war. And then finally, what they call the jus in bello, the fighting of the war. Always, first is the absolute protection of non-combatants. And secondly, the obligation to rebuild the nation that has been destroyed by the war. So in the just war tradition, and I add this parenthetically, Catholic scholars, me among them, but there's many who join me, say it's a nice tradition. The question is there ever been that far? It's nice to have around, but we wonder whether or not it has ever actually been a just war. But actually, in the just war tradition, there would be neither holy war nor terrorism nor murder. Because all of this is an intellectual exercise to give some moral guidelines to states as they ponder the question of violence. The final is what I call the holy war, which is the theological distortion. We all know the Crusades, the classic example of holy war. The holy war is always couched, and you mentioned it, Rabbi, couched in apocalyptic imagery. The holy war is never a war for political gain, never a war for strategic political interest, although I hasten to add, and I suspect you might agree with me, whatever the logic, the rhetoric of the holy war, there are always pragmatic economic and political gains. And I just will say it, it somehow strikes my mind as an example. Martyrdom, same thing. There's no concept of martyrdom in just war, and the only martyrdom in Jesus' teaching is the martyrdom of love for the other to the point of death. But now everybody who fights in the holy war is now, well, we don't call them martyrs, we call them heroes. Everybody's now a hero. But we forget about the fact that they have one task, and that's kill other human beings. That's not a hero. Just to say quickly that you want to be able to say that the contemporary holy war does have acts of terrorism, despite the very severe and clear attempts on the part of those who justify it to avoid, quote, as we know, collateral damage. But we know from the acts of private security companies, we know what's happened in the prisons like Abu Ghraib, and we know from recent not only convictions but testimonies of American soldiers that wholesale killing of civilians does indeed take place. But I leave you with this, my friends, and this is my personal Andrew Skutnicki addenda. I don't blame terrorism on holy warriors. I blame terrorism on war itself. I think every war is an act of terror.
Thank you, Dr. Andrew Skutnicki, for your wonderful presentation. One thing that you mentioned about the Sufism and in the Islamic understanding, just the whirling dervish, holding the right hand up to the sky, getting the love of God, and transmitting that love of God to the people, holding the left hand down. So we would like to have, we were thinking of what kind of logo or what kind of image we should have for the Abraham stable, and we decided to have the fountain, which, in the fountain, the one in the middle, it's the love of God that goes to the world, to the humanity, in three different lines to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So that's why we have the fountain in our logo. And now I would like to invite our last presenter, Mr. Fatih Akdemir. Mr. Fatih Akdemir is a theologian and a correctional chaplain. He received his bachelor's degree in divinity from Konya Selçuk University, the city of Rumi in Turkey in 1999. During his university years, he gave lectures in several schools, religious centers, and radio stations. In 2000, he came to the United States. To continue his academic career, he took many courses from Hartford Seminary and transferred to Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut, where he received his master's degree in religious studies. He has been working for the state of Connecticut Department of Correction as a Muslim chaplain since 2003. He is an active volunteer of the Turkish Cultural Center in Connecticut and an organizer of interfaith programs such as Abraham's Table series in Connecticut. Please join me up in Fatih.
Pastor, I forgot to greet you. Let me tell three things first. Shalom Aleichem. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. Thank you so much. Islam versus terrorism. As you know, we have a if we have a match or play or game, we have, let's say, two boxers, right? And we say Michael versus Joseph, for example. So Islam is fighting with terrorism, and unfortunately terrorism is the biggest enemy of Islam, unfortunately. What does Islam mean? Briefly, Islam means submission, surrender, and peace. So let me try to put it in just one sentence: achieving peace through submission and surrender. Terrorism, as we all know, is the biggest crime against humanity, and terror comes from the Latin verb terrora, meaning to frighten. Common definition of terrorism refer only to those violent acts which are intended to create fear and are perpetrated for a religious, political, or ideological goal, deliberately target or disregard the safety of civilians, and are committed by non-government agencies. Holy war, what does it mean? A religious war led with an exceptionally high grade of religious feeling, such as crusades or some other historical facts. But let me try to share what jihad means. Sometimes we confuse and mix it together. Holy war and jihad are totally different. Jihad, the Islamic word, literally means to strive or to struggle. It comes from the root of jihad. For example, we say mujahid, mujahada, jihad, they all come from the same root. But jihad, in the broadest meaning, is striving through the way of God, struggling with both evil self, actually Quran calls it nefis, evil commanding self. So it means struggling with both evil self and Satan, living and reflecting the essence of Islamic way of life. But one of the great Islamic Turkish scholars described jihad as the effort made to remove obstacles that stand between humanity and God. That could be some enemy, that could be our beastly desires, that could be sins, anything. Jihad has 4 different dimensions according to the Islamic book of Islam. The defensive dimension, jihad, gaza, and harb. In Quran we see these terms 34 times, but only 4 refer directly to war, which is defensive war. And let me tell you something original. In the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we have seen a lot of battles, a lot of wars. None of them were about attacking the enemy. All of them were defensive wars or battles. Either the mushrik tribes of Jahiliyyah or Quraysh or some other non-Muslims attacked or betrayed the agreement between Muslims and non-Muslims, or something happened outside of Muslim community, and unfortunately they had to defend themselves. They had to do some battles. This is the defensive dimension of jihad. The second one is the psychological dimension, mujahada, against the devil and beastly desires of nefis. The third one is intellectual dimension. It is actually ijtihad, comes from the same root, which means the effort of a Muslim scholar to arrive at a decision using all his intellectual capabilities. And the fourth and the last one is the social dimension. It means serving the entire community and preventing injustice. There is a hadith of Prophet Muhammad. Hadith, by the way, it means the sayings, the holy sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He said that right after he returned to his Medina, his city, and they just completed one battle, he said that we are returning from the lesser jihad, the smaller jihad, to the greater jihad, which is meaning the self-struggle with our evil commanding soul. So fighting or doing something like war is not the real jihad, but the real jihad is fighting with hatred, fighting with ignorance, fighting with our evil commanding soul. Martyrdom, according to Islamic sources, it's known in Arabic as shaheed. Shaheed means martyr, and it's literally means witness. Some Muslim brothers and sisters must know that. We say the person, when he becomes Muslim, he is taking shahada, right? Taking shahada means to be an eyewitness of the truth of being that there's no God but Allah and Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger. So shaheed means witness. The main factor in being a martyr is witnessing the truth in all aspects of life. Martyrdom, or shahada in Arabic, is not only achieved by being killed by a non-Muslim soldier during a battle. Also, such an event does not guarantee martyrdom. And let me share this with you. A terrorist is not a martyr. Never. Never. Because martyrdom is a spiritual rank achieved only when the principles of Islamic religion are observed. You cannot just say, okay, I want to be martyr, I want to please my God, let me enter heaven and take this, so let me kill them. Never. You can never justify that. In order to be considered a real martyr, you have to defend yourself, you have to only attack the people who are attacking you. For example, a rule of war, according to Islamic sources, not here, but later it's going to come here. You cannot harm women. You may not touch children. You may not touch plants. You may not touch animals. You may not kill the religious people. And you may not kill the people who have no weapons or who have no intention to attack you. You may only fight those who are fighting you. This is the Islamic war rule. And martyrdom is a spiritual rank. Okay, it can never be reached by employing revenge. This is very important. Martyrdom can never be reached by employing revenge and hatred. The methods that a Muslim employs must be as righteous as his or her purpose. Okay, here there is a hadith of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Yeah. He said that in the hereafter, a martyrdom, so-called, this is very important, so-called shaheed, so-called martyr, will come to God. And God will make him know about his blessings. The man will acknowledge them, then God will ask him, what did you do with them? He will say, oh my Lord, I fought in your way until I died as a shaheed, as a martyr. And God will remark, you are lying. You fought so that you may be called a brave soldier, brave warrior. Your intention was not my pleasure. So any terrorist is like him, unfortunately. Some people has a misunderstanding or misconception that if they kill the non-Muslims, then they will die as martyrs, they will enter paradise, and they will receive 70 or something with virgins. No, that's not right. A true Muslim cannot be a terrorist. Terrorism has no religion. Never. A true follower of Islam cannot be a terrorist, and this is a wonderful statement, very crystal clear, by Fethullah Gülen. Very short. The main objectives of Islam are the protection of 5 things: protection of faith, protection of life, protection of wealth, offspring, and mind. For example, if somebody is harming my faith or attacking or cursing my faith, then I have to defend it. If somebody is trying to take my life or the life of my beautiful wife or my wealth, my offspring, my mind, then I have my right to self-defense. So self-defense is important in Islam, but not attacking the non-combatants. Okay, and this is one of the most famous verses from the Quran, chapter 5, verse number 32. Whosoever kills an innocent human being, it shall be as if he has killed all mankind. And whosoever saves the life of one, it shall be as if he had saved the life of all mankind. Am I going to say something wrong if I tell this? According to this, and according to my understanding of this verse, the terrorist is the worst man, worst creature, and the doctors, right, who save lives is the best man maybe. If you take the life, you are committing the gravest sin. But if you save somebody, that's perfect. Only this part. This is from Quran chapter 6, verse number 151 and 152. You shall not take life which God has made sacred, except by way of justice and law. Again here, nor take life which Allah has made sacred, except for just cause, and if anyone is slain wrongfully, we have given his inheritor authority, permission to demand qisas, retribution, or to forgive. This is very important, and the next verse is about it. Chapter 24, verse number 22. They should rather pardon and overlook. Would you not love God to forgive you? God is ever forgiving and most merciful. Islam encourages the person who has lost his relative to forgive the killer. It's very important. God forbid, 9/11, it was a very, very unfortunate attack. A lot of people passed away. And even I, as a Muslim, cried a lot. Only monsters must do it. No real humans can do such a bad action. Permission to fight is given to those, this is very important, please read this with me, those who are being attacked. So if the enemy, if the person, if the people, if the army is not attacking you, you don't do anything. You just have to, you have your right to self-defense, but no harming, no attacking unless they do. Okay, the worshippers of the All-Merciful are they who walk gently upon the earth, and when the ignorant address them, they reply, Salam, which means peace. Okay, and this is very significant. This is a saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He said that indeed, whoever intentionally kills himself, then certainly he will be punished in the fire of hell, wherein he shall dwell forever. Oh, it's scary, right? In true Islam, terror does not exist, again by Fethullah Gülen. If Islam promotes terrorism, then why is Islam growing so fast and rapidly in the world right now? Please don't misunderstand me, because I put this here intentionally. I would like to say this. If Islam promotes terrorism, if Islam always encourages its followers to kill non-Muslims, then nobody in the world would think that, oh, Islam is okay. I would never become Muslim if I hear such kind of thing. So this is very significant. I just want you to please think about it. Okay, Islam rejects and condemns every form of terrorism. It does not provide any cover or justification for any act of violence, be it committed by an individual, a group, or a government. As a human community, we must be vigilant, very careful, and very careful to oppose these shameless evils, which are not justified by any sane logic, nor by the religion of Islam. According to the FBI, as reported by the Council on Foreign Relations, 95% of the terrorist acts in the US are committed by non-Muslims. And this is very interesting. According to the Homeland Security, since 9/11, 2001, only 33 people have been killed in the terrorist attacks. But approximately 150,000 murders committed in the United States since then. The terrorists, whoever they are, could not be worthy Muslims. The Islamic message is a message of justice, peace, and mercy to all mankind, just like Jesus, peace be upon him, preached perfectly. For example, as my brother, as my friend Mehmet introduced me, I'm a chaplain in Department of Correction. I have been doing this for almost 8 years. And whenever I mention Jesus, peace be upon him, in my sermons, believe me, I always want to cry because I love Jesus, peace be upon him, so much. He was a perfect example for everyone. He was the role model of justice, tolerance, and unconditional love, exactly. But we have to believe that, as Muslims, of course, Muhammad, peace be upon him, preached the same thing which Jesus preached. The basic truth is the same, unconditional love. He said that, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whoever hurts a Jew or a Christian, he would be like hurting me, and he who hurts me hurts God. He said that. Suicide bombing of civilian targets is evil and prohibited under Islamic law clearly. I would tell suicide bombers intending to attack civilians that they would be murderers, not martyrs, and that they would go to hell, not heaven. Suicide bombing of civilian targets is evil and prohibited by Islam. They cannot be considered martyrs of Islam because they harm and kill innocent people. They traumatize and create psychological injuries. They cause damage and harm the properties of innocent civilians. They tarnish the image of Islam. They make their own families suffer, and they probably aid the success of an international crime organizations. Two more, they make the enemies of Islam happy. They become responsible for an unforgivable crime. Quran chapter 5, verse number 8 says, "Do not let the hatred of some people move you to commit injustice." Okay, a true Muslim can, by definition, never be a terrorist. We then have to distinguish between the misleading phrase Muslim terrorist, or as some people mispronounce it, Muslim terrorist. And we have to maybe prefer this: criminal terrorist who calls himself a Muslim. He is not a Muslim terrorist. He is a criminal terrorist who calls himself a terrorist. Okay, let me skip this. Salvation could not be achieved through the killing of innocent people. Islam does not encourage any kind of terrorism. In fact, it denounces it. Those who use terrorism in the name of Islam, in fact, have no other faculty except ignorance and hatred. True and sincere Muslims cannot be terrorists because if they do something evil, even if it is as tiny as an atom, they will pay for that both here and in the hereafter. Let me try to finish with one two short examples. It reflects the intolerance. May Allah forgive me. It reflects the interfaith acceptance, tolerance, and mercy of Prophet Muhammad towards the Christians and Jews. And after that, I'm going to ask you one short question, but don't answer, just listen. A Christian group from Najran during the life of Prophet Muhammad wanted to visit Muhammad, peace be upon him. According to our authentic historical sources, they were 60, maybe 61 people. They came to Prophet Muhammad in Medina, asked him a lot of questions regarding the oneness of God, Jesus, all other details. And then it was Sunday. So the Christian group wanted to offer their mass. They wanted to pray. And they asked Muhammad, peace be upon him, where they can pray. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, welcomed their request. And you know what he did? He requested his companions, his disciples, to empty the masjid, to set up the masjid, and he gave permission to the Christian group to pray, to offer their mass right in the middle of the masjid. And the Christian group was very surprised, and they thanked Muhammad, peace be upon him, for his permission. And the Christians were able to pray in the middle of the masjid. Another thing, one day Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was having chat with his disciples, his companions, and all of a sudden he just saw a Jewish funeral. A Jewish coffin was carried upon the shoulders of 4 Jews. They were heading to the Jewish cemetery. As soon as Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has seen them, he stood up respectfully and showed his respect to the Jewish congregation. One of his friends asked, "O Messenger of God, why did you do that? They are Jews." And Muhammad, peace be upon him, smiled and said, "Yes, but they are the servants of God. I have to respect them." So, I'm just going to ask you my short question then, inshallah. Thank you. How can a follower of that person, Muhammad, peace be upon him, who is extremely respectful to the Christians, who is extremely respectful to the Jewish people and to everyone, how can his followers become terrorists? Do I look like a terrorist? Thank you very much.